Now to invite the Deputy Prime Minister. Ready when you are. DPM, you there? Right, cool.
Can I be heard and seen clearly?
Yeah, you're loud and clear.
Give me a second. Yeah. You guys in chat, please. Two important clarifications I want to make at the top of this speech. The first is that they cannot run away from the burden. In an instance where people are pessimistic towards AI, that is what leads to the constant trend of not investing in AI. This is for the simple logic that people and the political will to invest in AI reduces, which significantly reduces the budgets that governments allocate, for example, to invest in AI development, or even in instances where they do invest, when they become unsuccessful, they halt the projects because they're seen as they're scrutinized and they see it in a pessimistic light. What's important to recognize in this debate is what does seeing AI as optimistic and pessimistic look like. On our side of the house, when you see AI as optimistic, doesn't mean that you blindly believe that the AI is just amazing and at what it has done. There are a few natural incentives that we gave you in first itself as to why AI would be regulated on either side, on our side of the house as well. The first is in terms of the scrutiny by organizations that work independently just to scrutinize AI, for example. Secondly, the failures of AI in the past means that there is a rising social consciousness on the importance to regulate AI on either side of the house. Thirdly, is more research on AI, which only can happen on our side of the house, means that we're able to invest in better forms of AI. But finally, is that if AI increases in number on our side of the house, it means that the companies fighting against each other to get the market also increases, which imposes a natural checking mechanism against cooperation to make sure that exploitation or even the worst forms of AI are not created on either side of the house. The difference then is on their side of the house, the way they view AI is in a pessimistic light, i.e. that the AI, if it fails once, it can never be corrected for, or the sector of AI itself is something that you should not invest in. On our side, if it fails, it's the likelihood or the possibility that you can improve the AI to serve its function of what it should have served for. The second important clarification I want to make is in terms of access, because what the opposition in this debate tries to do is limit access to only corporations, and they just assert this claim to begin with. The first thing we would point out is that being optimistic about AI means there is a natural incentive to increase access to AI as well, because people believe that like the demand increases when you believe that AI is successful to begin with. So the increased usage of AI and the access to AI and improvements in AI means that more people are able to access this, and there is a necessity to make them accessible, because you see this as a good thing to begin with. But the third important clarification I want to make is that they cannot just tell us that automation is not AI. Look at automation, for example. Self-driving cars, literally AI, because they can think on their own, and they can think on their own means that these are means that automation is also included in AI systems. First question then, in terms of exploitation, which is the biggest and only argument that the opposition in this debate gives. The first thing that they tell us is that regulation cannot exist on our side of the house because you do not view it skeptically. Importantly, even if you don't view it optimistically, doesn't mean that you have to give in to the flaws that exist in the system of AI. Importantly, if the environmental movement sees the environment and the crisis of solving the environment in an optimistic light, doesn't mean that they become complacent. They still fight for the cause, but it's the belief that there is a light in the end of the tunnel. This principle and mechanism still applies in this debate as well. So in an instance where you want to develop AI, the fact is that it can be regulated on our side too, and the push for regulation exists on either side of the house, but it's about how you, but the push for regulation exists on either side of the house. The second thing I want to point out is that what they tell you then is that privacy laws are going to be violated. Like, kind of, these are laws that exist in status quo for a reason. Just because AI develops doesn't mean like everyone's just going to lax the protections that exist on AI. They never told us why it's likely to begin with. But importantly, what they tell us is that it's impossible to regulate AI. Let's take them at their best and assume it's impossible to regulate AI. The problem is misuse of AI is going to exist on either side of the house. The importance of this analysis then is that on our side of the house, when you increase the usage of AI, your ability to regulate also increases with the increasing usage of AI. But importantly, if there are bad actors who want to misuse it, at least the government is not in a back foot anymore, and therefore there is an ability to increase in regulation in those instances. This is, for example, similar to how spyware, for example, is present with like bad actors, but on our side of the house, you're able to make sure that governments also have access to this, and not only bad actors, which means the accountability of these individuals is likely going to be better. On their side of the house, when they're pessimistic, that is when they have no investment, and that is when they make people vulnerable to all of these abuses and lack of and the exploitation of AI, more susceptible to the most vulnerable individuals. The importance of this analysis in the vein here is that we benefit the most vulnerable individuals. The reason for this is twofold. One is that the most exploited in status quo are the most vulnerable individuals, and most exploited is the most vulnerable individuals in terms of the lack of AI, for example. This is, for example, similar to what Eliza spoke to you about, in terms of how people working in like bad living conditions are able to now get better job opportunities because of the optimistic light that they view these jobs to begin with. But secondly, is in terms of climate change technology, for example, even if it fails, or even if you're not able to get breakthroughs on our side of the house, the fact that you keep working towards making that technology better means that projects won't be halted. This is important because this means that they waste resources on that side of the house when they're pessimistic, and when one failure occurs, they just assume that the AI can never develop to be the best form. On our side, you never halt these projects, and therefore you improve on the system and
hello, you there? Right, I stopped you at the 6 minutes. If you can find back your speech, it'll be fine. Right, yeah, ready when you are.
just give us a second to switch our connection.
No issue, no issue.
Sorry, what is the last thing that you heard me say?
I heard exploitation. Not particularly sure what's the next step of the argument.
Around what time did you lose me?
6. Exactly 6 you stop.
Yeah. The implication of all of these reasons of regulation means that the most vulnerable actor on that side of the house is likely not able to access this technology. The reason why this is important is, one, we're able to prevent exploitation of these individuals by getting bad jobs, for example. But secondly, is that even if climate change technology fails right now, the ability for it to develop and the trust and hope that it would develop only exists when you have an optimistic perspective of this, and that can only be possible on our side of the house. The reason why this this is important is because there's likely to be a wastage of resources on their side of the house. The reason for this is that in an instance, one AI technology that you develop fails for the first time after trial. The problem is there is an incentive on the part of governments to pressurize corporations or corporations themselves. When it's exposed to the public, means that people would never buy this AI. And the problem is that they halt the projects at what they have started to begin with. This means there's unlikely to be further development of this technology, and this means there's likely to be a wastage of resources. At least on our side of the house, when you get people to trust AI, that is when you are likely to reduce the wastage of resources on stopping projects that you have already started, and that is why it's a good thing. Second question then on why individuals are better. This is an independent path to victory that is open to us because they never responded to all of the analysis that we gave you. In terms of how we reduce the cost of standards, the only response that we get is that development for technology would exist on either side, but we've already proven to you why it's unique to the proposition in this debate. My final extension then is on how we're able to deal with times of crisis better on our side of the house. The reason for this is simple. During times of crisis like COVID-19, for example, there was a necessity to improve on things like vaccines, for example, at a faster rate. When you're pessimistic about technology, that is when there's lack of funding directed towards this aspect of technology. And what you do is make humans make this technology because you do not trust the AI to begin with. This means that A, you're unable to make groundbreaking inventions on their side of the house. Secondly, the inventions that occur happens at a smaller rate. But thirdly, is that they're never able to develop them to begin with because it requires complex knowledge. For all of these reasons, during times of crisis, we are able to combat this, and this becomes the most important narrative during these instances. We win on that too. We're extremely proud to propose.
All right, thank you for the fine speech. Now I'd like to invite the Deputy Leader of Opposition or the second speaker for the negative team.
Okay, awesome. Hello, my name is Karim. I am the Deputy Leader of the Opposition for Orion Ruby and the reply speaker as well. Pronouns he, him, POI preferences verbal. And I am just going to go ahead and get started, assuming that everyone is able to hear me.
Yeah, you're loud and clear. Ready when you are.
Great. This debate was never about whether or not AI is good or bad in and of itself. This debate is about the impacts of optimistic and pessimistic messaging regarding artificial intelligence, its effects on society, both tangibly and normatively. We think that it's only pessimistic messaging that improves its transparency and thus improves our future. That's why we're proud to oppose. In this speech, we're going to do refutation of what we just heard from side government, then delve into a little bit of rebuilding of side opposition material, and then introducing our third piece of substantive material. Now then, briefly in terms of refutation. From the outset, I want to contend with the true meaning of optimistic and pessimistic messaging under the motion. We told you the pessimistic messaging is delineated by skepticism and scrutiny about AI. But contrary to what proposition told you, we don't think it is particularly charitable or realistic for them to claim that the rising social consciousness is now going to rectify any of the problems AI has, is, and will cause. In truth, the optimistic messaging that government advocates for can't actually realistically bring about regulation when the priority in government's world is expanding AI at a large and rapid scale. These are inherently contradictory priorities, and to increase regulation is to decrease the benefits like greater economic capital that they try to claim. That cuts down on proposition's own offense. But we're willing to bite the bullet that our advocacy leads to less investment in the short term. But we think that's a good thing because that's greater incentive for AI developers to actually address the concerns that we brought forward in our positive material. We think that only then, when you want to actually see a lot of people using the AI that you've developed, do we think that those kinds of concerns that we brought to you, like data and privacy, do we think those are actually addressed? What did we hear from side proposition? We heard a couple of things. There are two arguments. First, on how optimism accrues societal benefits, and second, on more development of technology. A couple of things. First, proposition's primary push is that you save time and you basically make the process entirely efficient, right? We think that the efficiency they talk about comes at the cost of A, creativity, insofar as ChatGPT writing up articles directly detriments that, right? For example, for journalism, when it's applicable to particular fields like journalism or art. And B, this efficiency comes at the cost of the unjust acquisition and synthesis of data and information. What does this mean? This means that data collection and brokering, which is procedurally unjust insofar as people do do not explicitly consent to this collection is directly mechanized against them in the effort of garnering more power or more money. We think that we can provide a couple of examples for this. Take Cambridge Analytica and the Facebook scandal in 2016, right? Where you see algorithms and artificial intelligence used directly to persuade the persuadables, directly sending thousands upon thousands of targeted advertisements through AI to particular individuals who were deemed that they could be easily persuaded. We think that kind of political weaponization and that weaponization of artificial intelligence and technology in general is harmful to processes like democracy, that kind of thing that we've already asserted to you in our second. But in terms of the second primary push that we heard from proposition, this assertion that money is saved, right? We don't think this is true. The upfront initial cost of purchasing and updating AI is a burden that cannot be assumed by the vast majority of small and mid-sized businesses and can only occur for the largest companies who already use AI in the status quo anyway. Taking proposition to their highest and assuming that money is saved is very unlikely that the money that you save would actually be used for reinvestment to research and development like they assert. We think that it's a lot more realistic for you as a business owner, right, say, to assume all of those benefits. The third primary push from proposition is this idea that people get jobs from the AI sector. I'm not particularly sure why this is. Artificial intelligence is known to build on itself and to develop itself through algorithms, so only a limited number of programmers and software engineers, which require a significant amount of technical education, are ever actually needed to work on AI code. But even the more fundamental problem that we needed engagement from, the thing that we needed more focus on throughout this debate, is the fact of the matter that it's about optimistic and pessimistic messaging, right? You have zero incentive to actually impose things like regulation and to actually rectify any of the concerns that we brought forward in opposition when you're just being complacent, when you're saying that look at all of the benefits that AI has accrued for us throughout society. Look at all of these things and we should all societally invest in it because it's principally good for our society. We tell you that's not the case. You can't actually have that kind of regulation and that kind of social consciousness that the side government tries to claim for their side is going to happen. We think that only when you're skeptical, only when you're critical about artificial intelligence are you actually able to improve it. What were the arguments that we brought forward to you? We brought forward to you two things. First, on corporate control, and second, on data manipulation and privacy concerns. Big corporations use AI to increase sales or to get users addicted to their platforms. The privatization and capitalistic nature of artificial intelligence means that businesses and corporations cut corners. They use data that was unjustly acquired in order to actually make a profit, in order to actually gain power. We think that all of these things are things that side government needs to bite the bullet on and needs to accept if they ever want to claim any benefit of artificial intelligence, and if they even want to claim a chance at saying that they won this debate. We think that the malicious intentions far outweigh any presumable benefit that side governments will attempt to claim for their side. Insofar as all of the uses of AI are either used to consolidate power or increase profit, someone is always going to be harmed, and we think that's always going to be the most vulnerable individuals in society. The lack of transparency is also just as morally culpable because it's very difficult for you to understand the process and procedure behind AI when you're just trying to do it out of profit. We think that only on our side are actually able to rectify that. I'll take that point.
On the one hand, you argue that AI development won't stop, and then you also argue that AI development leads to massive violations of privacy. Which characterization is it?
So we tell you that the reason as to why exactly it's both is because right now artificial intelligence exists, right? But we think that you're not going to get the proper AI development on your side, right? Unless you have proper regulation. That only happens when people are skeptical. We say that we are willing to bite the bullet that there's less investment from individuals, right? But we still think that big corporations are going to continue using AI. People are going to still somehow interact with AI in their everyday lives, considering how already integrated it is. We think that only regulation happens on our side of the house. Third substantive then, on efficacy of pessimistic messaging. This directly engages with the POI we just heard. The thesis of this argument is that taking side propositions that are highest, assuming that artificial intelligence through pessimistic messaging is the way to go, we think that people become more scrutinizing and skeptical of AI, making it more transparent. This is exclusively beneficial to our side because presumably on government side, people are more caring about the perceived benefits derived from AI compared to the procedural and moral problems about it. When people are intentionally more critical critical of AI, we think that then, and only then, do you improve the quality of AI when the developers of the system are compelled to rectify societal concerns. What does that mean? That means that you magnify all of government's offense and all of their benefits, but that magnification only occurs inside opposition's world. Let's assume the premise for a moment that AI is good, right? Let's take the government's premise at their best. We think, why then do we fulfill that better? The reasonable comparative to pessimistic messaging is optimistic messaging, where we think that it is characterized by a sense of complacency and an overemphasis of the benefits. This is why side governments cannot just claim that people in their world are cognizant of any of the repercussions when the societal message is always about something along the lines of AI is amazing and we should all invest in it. The psychological underpinnings of capitalism override any ability to reconcile the harms of AI with your disillusionment about its harms. We think that at the end of the day, what side opposition has done is giving you a comprehensive account as to why exactly AI is benefited on our side of the house, why we see significantly more care being taken in order to have proper regulation to make the process more transparent, because we think that right now, the esoteric and abstruse nature of AI makes it easy for corporations to just exploit its use in order to consolidate more money and more power. And only on side opposition's world do you actually see that issues being rectified. For all of those reasons and so many more, opposition is the victor in this debate. Thank you very much.
Right. Thank you for the fine speech. Now to invite the government whip.
Can I be seen and heard clearly?
Yes, you're loud and clear.
I'll be taking PYs in the chat probably after the 5th minute. The dawn of the atomic age, nuclear energy was the next big thing. People saw it as the green energy that would save the world. People saw it as people were optimistic about it. People thought that this could be what would replace big oil and be positive for the climate change. But everything changed when the narrative that was passed became suddenly one that was skeptical, one that was pessimistic, one that followed a few isolated incidences that resulted people in thinking nuclear energy to be this mass harmful thing. That resulted in people scrapping off nuclear energy, losing funds, and us being more reliant on a way worse form of energy. And that is the same narrative that's likely to exist on the Asuramanna house. There's this new technology that people are unaware of on both sides of the house, but they approach it as one that will lead to mass harms. The narratives you see on media, on news are ones that are going to lead to an AI war, AI constantly spying on you. All the reasons as to why people should not invest it, all the reasons as to why startups should not be based on it. And that is where we argue that everything falls apart for side opposition, because they can't necessarily run this argumentation that they would lead to AI development when it's not going to happen on that side of the house to begin with. To draw the distinction, it's that they can't cop the benefit of regulation being, rectified and keep moving forward, because on the other house, whenever a mistake does happen, whenever a parallel like Chernobyl for nuclear energy does happen, people are not going to focus on rectifying it, but rather the political and social narrative and response is going to be one where they're going to ditch it completely and completely negate it and negate its development. Two clashes of the house, firstly with regard to the development of AI, and secondly with regard to privacy and its practical outcomes. Firstly, on development of AI, and I'd like to note that the practical outcomes of this are contingent on the fact that AI is able to develop to a standard that is of any use. I'm going to deal with this with a few ideas, right? Firstly, on development, because what we told you is that in order for a government to spend on anything, they need to have public perception and political will, right? Because you're talking about taxpayers' money and taxpayer funding likely going into this to begin with. And this is incredibly important, because when there is political will around it. When people are supportive, that is when you spark discourse, right? It's an answer of the House that politicians are not going to be afraid to bring AI up and discuss it and debate it and pass legislation that actually supports it ethicality, right? Because people are supportive of it as opposed to antagonizing that discussion to begin with on the rest of the House. And we're seeing since status quo, like for instance, how we saw the EU pass the Artificial Intelligence Act. And note that these are very crucial because not only do you actually create a more transparent system on our side, but when you're willing to discuss and pass legislation around it, that's when you create things like open source, the same way that like the same legislation mentioned did before. And that's when you increase accessibility to things like local markets, and you have the spillover effect when you increase competition. But certainly note when it comes to private companies and startups, they're incredibly dependent on things like the stock market and shares. And this is once again hung on public opinion. But thirdly, like after told you, no response is the notion of how there's demand, right? When you increase the demand, when you have more AI coming up, when you see people, think of this as something that is important, even if the initial AI might not be the best, at the point of which you create more and more competitors coming in, that's when you do one, create better technology and better products on our side of the house, but to also lower the barrier of entry, meaning that you're going to have more people being able to access it and more people being able to produce AI technology. What exists on the comparative, right? Because note on the rest of the house, even though governments might not invest in AI or might reduce spending on AI massively, you're going to have all these terrible corporations that they talk about go to other external bad actors, right? And this is where we brought in the whole notion of things like spyware. You're going to have companies like Pegasus being easily able to, equip themselves with illegal forms of AI surveillance on the other side of the house. And more importantly, governments are not going to be able to develop any counter mechanisms because this is considered illegal, right? I'm just going to bring the example of Cambridge Analytica and how they talk about political weaponization. The fact is, Cambridge Analytica was illegal, but also any other technology that could have been able to detect this violation of data in privacy would also have been illegal, right? We think that there are AI systems that are able to detect these malicious actors and avoid such infringement. This is crucial because this impact goes way beyond things like privacy, right? Even when it comes to military, you're going to have terrorist groups, you're going to have all these other external actors being able to develop AI systems because they get that funding regardless. Whereas on the comparative, the actors who can do anything about it, your states, your governments are not going to be having that money, that taxpayer money being injected to developing these systems. You're going to have governments at a massive setback on that side of the house. I'm going to weigh this whole clash with regard to regulation because they tell you that they are able to have a very cautious approach on the side of the house, right? But that doesn't deal with the fact that even if you might have a short-term harm of things like the Facebook data leak happening, those interactions matter because those interactions create legislation, right? The more interactions you have with the expansion of AI is when you have more reasons to add on to your legislature and improve these forms of regulation. So we are willing to make that trade-off at the point of which the social chain, the regulation we have towards this are far better on our side of the house. If I move on to my second clash, I'll take that POI. Okay, seeing none, second clash with regard to go on.
Yeah. So when it comes to AI regulation, when you're constantly being hit with a message that AI is good and that we always need to invest in it, how do you reconcile like your investment with like into AI with like the harms that is happening right now and like the flaws that are apparent?
The fact is, when more people invest into AI, you're still going to have AI being used in more prevalent, right? And that's when all these big incidents that they talk about are going to be newsworthy because there's a lot of attention around it. The difference is when you're positive about it, you're going to be focused on rectifying it and moving on. Whereas on their comparative, when you're skeptical and pessimistic, one mistake is enough to completely scrap the entire technology. Okay, second clash with regard to the practical outcomes and whether this would be harmful, right? And this is why I want to deal with that entire notion of privacy. Firstly, know that even in status quo, when you don't have like an optimistic narrative of AI to begin with, you still have all these data privacy violations that they do talk about, right? They fail to prove why this is exclusive to this debate and to this narrative. But secondly, note, we would argue that when you have more of a prominence in this whole idea that social media algorithms are checking your privacy and your data, that is when more people are likely to opt into consenting into protecting their privacy, right? Because the problem at status quo is that people have stigmatized this to a degree that no one wants to talk about it. No one wants to know. There is not enough awareness about the whole idea that you can consent to opt out. Sorry, you can opt out of all these privacy invasions, right? What we do on our side is just increase that discussion surrounding it. But then to deal with the bigger impacts of this debate and the whole idea of development in science and technology, right? Because here they tell you that, look here, you're probably still going to lose many jobs. But know that this was a timeline argument, right? This is not just to talk about the short term, because we don't think that AI can even become creative to a degree that they can take the job of a journalist even in the next few decades, but that would take maybe even a century of learning and create new programs to get that impact. But rather, what's likely to happen is over time, the same way we saw with like the industrial revolution, you're going to see machines being integrated to the economy. People are going to be more and more dependent on them. They're going to be able to do hard labor jobs, construction, and other jobs that have usually left humans exploited. And this is to say that this is not necessarily being disillusioned, but rather being able to accept that technology the same way humans have done before, given that there is a preconceived idea that this is going to be something that's going to be beneficial, right? The issue we have in status quo is that people are taking this whole narrative of AI pessimism and manifesting it with scientific and technological pessimism as well, right? Because on the other side of the house, they have to deal with the fact that many people don't have trust in science and technology. That's why there's very less money spent on things like research when it comes to health and medicine. There's less investment when it goes to things like climate change and all of that, right? Even with COVID response, we saw so many people opting to traditional medicine goes towards science produced. We change it on the other side of the house, and there's a positive narrative towards tackling all these problems because people recognize the fact that we're screwed due to things like climate change, but we can use AI to actually get that level of change. We take down inertia that does exist and that distrust that does exist towards technology. We can crucially solve humanity's problems side with the side that does that.
All right, thank you for that fine speech. Now to invite the government opposition whip.
Hey, just to make sure, am I audible and visible?
You are loud and clear.
Great. Hello, everyone. My name is Yenuganti, proud to be the third opposition speaker in today's debate. My pronouns are he, him, and I'll be taking visual POIs. And I will go ahead and get started now. Side proposition loses this debate at the point at which they themselves use blind optimism in this debate with claims such as the populace can handle harms and AI solves for hard labor, or AI is the future, with zero skepticism due to these faulty reasoning so proud to oppose in today's debate. Panel, a few key things I'll be doing in today's speech. Firstly, I'll be providing a few key points on framing and 3 key points of clash and some weighing out for each. So firstly on framing. Panel, their definition of what optimistic really is hands down abusive. Optimism looks like is saying that AI will always work. Again, a very clear example of AI being optimistic, while pessimism is something along the lines of, I'm not sure if AI is going to work. Don't let us say pessimist skepticism is the exact same thing as optimistic messaging. We think that this quite literally detracts away from the opposition ground. And the second thing is on the work. We're not going to tell you that one optimistic message snaps people out of their jobs, falsify their very own reasoning here, at the point at which they themselves said AI development takes decades, even centuries. You're not going to see any of their positive impacts until centuries down the line, which means that the debate ought to be centered more along the short-term impacts than the long-term ones 2 centuries down. So before I go on, I'm just going to, our first key clash point is going to be on societal impacts. So on a top level note on regulation, the essential side proposition tells you that regardless of which side you're on, misuse of AI is always going to occur, which have one simple response. At that point at which the misuse of AI is still going to occur either way, why would we struggle through complicated regulation and legislation when we can quite literally minimize the negative impact of AI through skepticism and improving transparency, at the point at which just improving transparency and skepticism would solve for the negative impacts of AI? I think it's a much better alternative than trying to pass convoluted regulation or legislature on a worldwide level. Even at that point, we would also tell you that investment directly decreases regulation. It directly turns an argument. At the point at which billionaires and major stakeholder companies invest in AI, they want to gain a profit out of it, i.e. because they're companies and investors. At the point where they want to gain a profit off of it, the less regulation they have, the more money they can innately glean off of it. Extend what our second speaker already told you, at the point at which investment is increased into these AI, regulation is innately going to decrease because these people want to make more money. This means that side proposition is stuck in a bind. They can either increase regulation or decrease investment, and they haven't chosen a single advocacy to go for yet. That makes all their benefits a complete wash. Second is going to be on transparency, right? We've given you a very clear example of OpenAI. OpenAI was quite literally founded which is the parent company of ChatGPT, was founded based on the fact that many people were skeptic of AI, where AI skepticism quite literally drove innovation. You can even take this to DeepMind, where transparency revolutionized innovation. Discourse doesn't really do anything for innovation, i.e., me talking with you doesn't suddenly mean that AI is going to become smarter. Discourse has zero impact in this round. What truly actually does have an impact is real transparency. Now, onto our second key clash point is going to be on innovation. Before I do so, I will take a point if there is one. Seeing as that there are no points, I'll be going on to the second clash point on innovation. So firstly, cross-supplier OpenAI and DeepMind evidence already. We've already clearly demonstrated how transparency is the only thing that can drive innovation. However, we're also going to address their assumption on the labor standards, right? A few key responses here. Firstly, they tell you that they're going to eliminate hard labor jobs or dangerous jobs and replace them with AI. A few key issues here. Firstly, we would tell you that the people who are doing these hard labor jobs characteristically are lower income, which means that this is the only way they supplement themselves. At the point which they are quite literally removed from their jobs and forced to do something else, we think that's a disproportionately negative impact, i.e., you're removing people from their jobs, especially those who need the money the most, and replacing with an AI system. Second, we think this is completely unfeasible, i.e., we think that it's far cheaper to just like pay some adult $10 an hour than to spend billions of dollars into developing the AI system to grow and do the manual labor that someone else would do for extremely cheap amount of money. At that point, we completely went on the feasibility aspect too. Last but not least, do understand that the side proposition also told you something along the lines of how the skepticism would carry over into health and technological industry. In the technological industry, do remember, panel, that the amount invested just last year in technology was in the trillions, and the same can be applied for the health industry. Again, vaccines were mass produced, tech was on the boom due to more, and even major companies like Twitter were acquired just in the past year. There's absolutely no evidence saying that the skepticism is going to carry over. And even further, we would even go as far to say that even if the skepticism does carry over, it's an objectively good thing because you're increasing regulation and you're increasing transparency, which means that you're going to have net innovation in the long term, which means that the only way you're going to have any semblance of positive impact is going to be through the opposition world. But the third key clash point that we're even going to bring to is the companies or even the AI itself. We will tell you that if you truly want to have equitable AI or even AI that people trust, you don't sort of incite trust from people by just spreading false positive messages like AI is the solution. That doesn't make me trust AI. However, by addressing true skeptic viewpoints, there's going to be a slow, gradual shift in society towards positive viewpoints. Extend what our second speaker already told you, at the point in which larger populations of people are listening to reason rather than simple pathos. We believe that you're going to have logical reasoning towards AI, which means that more people are going to end up supporting AI regardless of whether it's a good or a bad thing. And we think that that's a much more important thing to do in this debate fundamentally, because only through skeptical messaging, which is something only achievable through pessimistic messaging, which is something unique to the opposition, don't let proposition infringe upon our ground, that at the point where that's something only unique to opposition, we think that we can only glean the net benefits in this. And before I continue to sort of wrap up this debate, I'll take another point if there is any. Cool, seeing as that there are no points, I'll just be continuing on to the single two worlds comparison. So on the proposition world, here's a few things that you're going to see, panel. Firstly, you're going to see things like increased investment, which means that larger players in the market want more stake in AI, which means that they're going to use this more for corporate greed and they want less regulation so that they can get more money out of it at the end of the day. Second, you're going to see things like people blindly following AI messages, and you're going to see things like AI imploding and everybody suddenly loses hope. If you truly want people to believe in AI from the bottom of their heart, you ought to appeal to the logical reasoning, something that only fundamentally happens through skepticism. At the point where people are skeptic about certain things, they're more likely to understand the intricacies behind it, and later on maybe even understand the logic behind it, and come to accept the AI for what it truly is. Second, we're the only thing that truly breeds innovation. Look at historical precedents, even future historical precedents in the status quo. AI skepticism is the only thing in the last 2 decades that's quite literally drove AI has increased regulations and has even come to the biggest and has even led to the biggest technological changes in the system of AI, i.e., look at OpenAI or even DeepMind Technologies, which are the 2 major players in the status quo in the field of AI. Even further, we would even tell you that even if you increase skepticism in society on a writ large level, you're going to see general positive beliefs spread around, i.e., people are going to be questioning things more, which leads to, again, more regulation, or at least at proposition's highest ground, you're going to see positive impacts in general as people slowly come to understand things through logical perspectives. Now, everything that they say, essentially summarized through discourse or any other means, again, we've completely debunked this. The only way to even gain benefits is through opposition. Therefore, so proud to oppose in today's debates. Thank you.
All right, thank you for that fine speech. To conclude the entire opposition case, I would like to invite the opposition replies.
Okay, fantastic. I'm just going to go ahead and get started and assume that I am audible.
Yes, you are.
Great. I'm going to chat about a number of things in this speech. First of all, who best increases regulation into artificial intelligence technology? Opposition's argument here is that skepticism and criticality leads to greater policy action and transparency on AI. As it stands, artificial intelligence is propped up by the foggy barrier of esoteric and complex concepts as to how exactly the technology works. We never got any incentive analysis as to why exactly things like investment and support of AI, things that you get presumably under the optimistic line of messaging that side proposition asserted, why exactly that can occur at the same time as regulation, given that regulation directly encumbers and directly detriments the extent of your investment and its value. We don't think that this is necessarily anything that's going to happen for all the financial incentives that we've already given you. But proposition's assertion here under this clash is that optimism solves for data privacy concerns like data leaks, political weaponization, so on and so forth. And that pessimistic messaging means that one bad incident means that everyone will refuse to see AI. But we don't think that's all like necessarily true for all of the reasons the opposition second and third gave you, right? People understand that artificial intelligence is ingrained into their everyday lives. That's when, for example, if they go into the Google and search up and try to purchase like a new product, they know that they're going to like have artificial intelligence do things like recommend, more furniture products, for example, if that's what you're looking for. But we think that the impacts are far more reaching, especially when it comes to making money and making power, especially for individuals that try to make use of artificial intelligence. The fact of the matter is, all of the concerns that we had brought up to you in our first and second substantive had gone completely unengaged with. The fact that data collection and synthesis of data using this sort of artificial intelligence technology is procedurally unjust. The fact that ethical considerations are not considered on the other side of the house, and you're not actually able to get any of the regulation that we champion on our side, and we think they actually improve AI on our side of the house. So we think that we accrue all the benefits that side opposition, or rather side government, tries to claim for themselves. We think that another more important and fundamental thing to note here is that only through pessimistic messaging about AI do you see fundamentally the necessary change, because through optimistic messaging, you remain complacent about all of these sorts of things. But in my third piece of positive material, I explained to you the efficacy of pessimistic messaging, right? This is not comparable to, like, for example, like nuclear energy, which we heard from side government as in terms of analogy. We think that people are going to still be compelled to use technology, and in turn, they are understanding that AI is going to be integrated into every piece of technology they use, right? The difference then is that when you are a pessimistic, you're more likely to push for change because you're refusing to like fundamentally like operate on a more like a more complex level in using AI. You might not be like willing to invest in it, but at least you're going to be using it, and you still have reason to actually push for that change. We don't think that push and that sort of incentive exists on the other side of the house. That's kind of scrutiny and skepticism exists on ours, and we think is significantly better. But now, secondly, let's look at the comparative world. We think that at the end of the day, the reason as to why exactly side opposition prevailed in this debate is because in order to garner all of the benefits of saving costs, saving time, saving money, all of these things that actually occur, we think that this debate came down to who exactly best improved transparency insofar as artificial intelligence exists on both sides of the house, right? We think, and we already told you, that we're willing to bite the bullet if it means that there's less investment into AI in the short term, insofar as that is the financial pressure that is placed on AI developers and software engineers to actually rectify and engage with opposition concerns and the concerns of millions upon millions of other people who want to see improvements in AI, right? It's not like you just discard AI and never use any piece of technology again. The much more realistic and more grounded understanding of the situation and status quo is that in order to access regulation, in order to achieve this change, you need to be skeptical. That's why side oppositions won this debate. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you for that fine speech. Now to conclude the government's case, I would like to invite the government reply.
Can I be heard and seen clearly?
Yeah, you're loud and clear.
Apa dia? Belum.
Two main observations I want to make at the top of this speech. Firstly, is what is the what are the trade-offs that we're willing to make in terms of the narrative to begin with? What they needed to concede is that there's going to be a wastage of resources on that side of the house. Because in their best case, being pessimistic means being skeptical. This means if an error occurs, they're skeptical about it and they stop investing in it because they don't see as a worthwhile trade-off that they are willing to make. On our side, comparatively, there's constant improvement on AI, and AI is likely to make errors in the short term, but you're able to develop on these errors, which means the resources are not wasted. The second main important thing that they need to concede is that on that side of the house, AI is likely to reduce, the developments of AI is likely to reduce. The reason for this is simple, and the only damage control that they do is to say the investment reduces in the short term, but in the long term, it would increase. But the reason why it's unlikely to increase is because this narrative exists across the entire time period, i.e. in the short term, their narrative would be pessimism. In the long term, also it will be pessimism. Therefore, I don't see, and it's unclear to me how short-term the trade-off and like pessimism does not trickle down into the long term. But the third reason, and we're the only reason, the only side that gave you reasons as to why investment reduces, they never gave us reasons as to why investment increases on their side of the house or even stays the same. Because we told you that there's going to be a lack of political will when they become skeptical because they feel that it's a wastage of resources. Given that, this proves that investment is likely to reduce on their side of the house, and they can't have it both ways. On the one hand, they want investment, but on the other hand, when you increase investment, privacy is violated. Like if that is true and they want investment, their own case does not stand because their entire exploitation argument is built upon investments increasing. And if they want investment, their argumentation on privacy does not stand. So they need to pick what they want to stand for. Given that first question in terms of exploitation, what I want to weigh in this debate is that they told you that privacy might be exploited. But what we told you is that at least this is something that you can regulate against. What you need to weigh this against is the argument that we gave you in terms of how bad actors have an incentive to invest in AI regardless on either side of the house. Given that, there is a necessity to regulate this, but the problem is AI can only be regulated with other AI. On our side of the house, we're able to regulate things like privacy, but your ability to regulate things like outside actors is out of your control, and therefore there is a necessity to build AI. The second thing I want to point out is that these exploitation can be prevented because of the political pressure. This is why our parallel that we ran in my speech, it becomes important. Just because the environmental movement is optimistic about climate change doesn't mean they become complacent and stop fighting for climate change because they recognize it's an issue. This is symmetric on either side of the house. The third thing is that if there's an importance given to, with the development of AI, there is an increasing importance to focus on the violations of privacy as well. This is, for example, similar to how when social media was developing, there was an importance to increase the regulations of social media, and this is the gradual trend and how it works in status quo as a whole. All this means that they need to bite the bullet and they need to tell tell us what they are willing to stand for, increasing investment or privacy, because we win on both. One, we prove to you why we reduce exploitation on our side of the house, but importantly, there is a necessity to evolve on either side, which leads me on to the second question on the investments in AI. I want to weigh here why it's important to develop AI now, and even taking them at their best, long-term development is not enough. Firstly, there is a necessity to evolve in status quo. By the time you develop AI in the long term, there's likely going to be vulnerable individuals who are hurt, in terms of the rising cost, for example, or in terms of the accidents that they have to go through because they don't have the AI, or the lack of information that they have to exercise their political will in the right to vote. All of these things would exist, all of these harms would pertain in the long term on their side. We're able to get this change faster on our side of the house with increasing public funding, and importantly is that you do not abandon projects, which means that you're likely to develop AI better. For all of these reasons, oppose.
All right, thank you for the fine speech. That concludes the final round of debate. Great job. For the panel, we shall move to room 1.
Wait, sorry, which room should we go to?
Wait.